Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Maisris, starting the third chapter, Pei Gimel Halacha Aleph. We're learning Daf Chaf Aleph all the way on top of the Amud. The new Mishnah in the new Perek continues to speak about, as an example, figs that are being brought through the Chatzar for them to be dried out, lamashal, on someone's rooftop. Now, quickly recapping the sugyas that we have been learning in the last few dafim. First of all, included midoraisa or midarabanan machlekes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish in re'iyas penei bayis, we have the concept of re'iyas penei chatzar, which means that an item that was already gemad malachid out there in the field, but it's not going to be merchandised, and therefore the kivius lamaisris only happens midoraisa when it has re'iyas penei bayis, when it enters the person's courtyard, whether it is biblical or only rabbinical, that is also keveya. But we also learned a lot the last chapter, and that will be the beginning of this chapter. What happens if you have an item shaloi nigmar malachtoi? We had a machlekes whether mekach is koiveya or not. Here we're going to begin speaking about an item shaloi nigmar malachtoi only because the owner is planning to dry them. So that's why we use the example of figs. Figs could be fully finished as they are fresh, but when the owner is planning to dry them out, so that's means that from his perspective, it's loy nigmar malachtoi, compounded with when it entered the chutzner. It didn't enter the chutzner to be in the chutzner. It entered the chutzner as a passway in order for it to get to the roof. So just as an example, a person has a ladder outside their house, as it used to be, and people used to use their rooftops as a location to dry out their fruits. And the person went through the chutzner to take it up to the rooftop to have it dried out. That will be the opening case of the Mishnah. There will be a big difference of opinions of how to understand the nuance of the Mishnah. Is it only because the product is not meant to stay in the chutzner, it's only going through the chutzner? This nekuda is not going to be the ikr for the way we will be learning the Mishnah. What will be the ikr is that since the kavana is to dry it out, it's a product shaloi nigmar malachtoi, and therefore the iyas penei hachatzar will not be koiveya for the bnei bayis. For the bnei bayis means for this person's wife and children. And from the fact that the Mishnah says that since the person intends to dry it, and therefore the bnei bayis are allowed to snack on it, that implies that the owner himself might not be able to snack, which is indeed, really, that's a machlekes in the Gemara between Amirayim. But one of the big chidushim that we will learn in today's daf, I'm going out of order, is that there is something unique that is imposed on the balabas. That even though, for you, who want to dry it out, it's loy nigmar malachtoi, the observer doesn't know what your intention is. And if you, the owner, only the owner, not the wife and children, we'll see in the Gemara why. If you, the owner, will bring it into the chutzner, your kavana is to take it to the rooftop to dry. If you're going to snack on it in the chutzner, the observer won't understand what you're doing. The item is ready. It riyas pnei chutzner. You're not allowed to have a snack. So eloma, when the owner takes it to the rooftop, that means in the place where he plans to dry it out, the observer understands why is he on the rooftop with a fig? Because he plans to dry them out. The makaim is megala de kavana, and then there's no marasayan issue, and it's going to be amazing. All of this is only said on the owner and not said on the balabais. Another couple of nukudas. I know I'm going out of the seder because I got a minute late, so therefore I have to settle myself. Even when there is a kvius, as we learned in the last chapter, mekach is koiveya. For example, even when mekach is koiveya, if the buyer, even according to Rabbi Meir, is the one that's taking the item, and he only takes it one by one, there is no seiruf, there was no combination, we learned he still will be allowed to snack from it. This will be a yesod that will be needed for another part of the Mishnah that will be speaking about workers. And again, whenever the worker is eating, because there is a biblical entitlement, that will not be viewed as mekach. But whenever a worker is able to eat something only because he's a worker and he made his own deal with the employer, so even though he didn't buy for those items with money, but he's paying for it in exchange of his work, that is considered a mekach. And the question will be regarding a wife who's eating mezoinas from the husband. Are we to view it that she is taking it as a mekach? Now, guys, what would be the mekach? that in exchange of her marriage, she's getting bezoinus. You can say that's called a mekach. Here in LA, even after you divorce your wife, you still have to give her mezoinus. So she's not getting it in exchange of the current marriage. She's getting it in exchange of her previous marriage. But do we say that?
He calls it alimony. She takes all my money.
All my money. Very nice. Rabbi Gordon of blessed memory is yard site, 10th yard site. And I want to say the following. There's a lot of nuggets today that are novel. And one will be, if we'll get that far, that even when a husband has a biblical obligation to give something to his wife, and don't forget, what did we learn in last Pedic? That when the employer has a biblical obligation to allow for his workers to eat, that's not called mekach. Even though they're only getting it because of their working, that's not called mekach. Even if mezoinus is da'iraisa, and there is a machloikus. There's a machloikus whether the obligation of a man to give his wife mezoinus is biblical or rabbinical. This has to do with how do you interpret the word she'er ksus and oina. That's explicit, that a man has to give his wife she'er ksus and oina. You have to know how to interpret that. If one of these words imply mezoinus, then it's a chiyuv midayraisa. Even if it's a chiyuv midayraisa, whenever a husband is giving to his wife without the involvement of a beis din, we will not view it as he's fulfilling his biblical obligation. It's going to appear to be a natural phenomena in which we could apply the concept of a mekach, that they're married, and in exchange of the marriage, he's giving her mezoinus. He was not chayived because of a beis din. We lav dafka will view it as something that he's obliged to give. We will view it halachically vis-a-vis the laws of maisris. Does she have to, can she snack from it? That it's a free gift and not a mekach, as we'll speak out more when we learn the daf inside. Let's leave it at that and let's jump right in. Okay. Hamavir te'enim b'chatzeiru liktzois. And I know that the name of the Pedic and the words of the Mishnah is Hamavir. And there is something about this Hamavir, which is that it's not your normal Re'iyas Pnei HaChatzer, which would mean you're taking it into the Chatzer to take it into the house. I know that's also going through the Chatzer. But then there's Re'iyas Pnei HaBayis. You get it? And Re'iyas Pnei HaBayis is for it to be in the bayis. Here, it's not even going to go into the house. It's going into the yard, into the front yard, onto a ladder, onto the roof. It's not going into the front yard for it to remain there. We will learn the Pshat in the Mishnah that detail won't be significant, because at the end of the day, there's Re'iyas Pnei HaChatzer. But since the intention is to take it up to the roof to dry, in other words, the figs are not viewed right now by their owner as something that's nigmar malachton. No, it's shaloi nigmar malachton. Because of that, Banov ubnei beisoi, his children and his bnei bayis, aviv. What's bnei bayis? Wife, only wife. It's one of the modest ways of saying wife. You would think bnei bayit means the kids. No, Banov ubnei bayis, the children and the wife, they are oichlin upeturin. Again, we're going to learn dafka the way with the marafulda. Look inside the second line. Oichlin upeturin. The chatzed eine keveya. Why? Not because you're mavir, the way others say. No, because bedavar shalei nigmar malachtoi. Now, by the fact that the Mishnah says that his children and wife can eat it, that already implies, even though this is a machlekes amoyroim, but the Marafulda is learning like pshuta shel mikra. Avalhu asur lechol, he won't be allowed to eat from those figs. Arai ela b'makim haktziyos, only in the actual location of the drying, which will be on the roof. Why? Because only over there do you have the concept of the mekoymai nikar. From this place where the owner is standing with the figs, it's evident. Why are you on the roof? People today go on the roof because there's a nice view. People didn't go on the roof for those reasons. They only went on the roof to dry it out because shaloi nigma merachtoi. But if the owner would want to eat it in the yard itself, which is shaloi b'mekoymai, then eino nikar. Then it's not evident to the observer that it's shaloi nigma malachtoi. The only problem is that I get marasayin. We all understand marasayin. Not that Kavan we apply it where we want, but Chazal applied it where they wanted. But why would we differentiate between him and his wife and kids? Either you're concerned for marasayin for everyone, or you're concerned for marasayin for no one. That will be what the Gemara will address. So we're going to leave that for the Gemara. Okay. Now comes the next case of the Mishnah. We're going to learn the next case only with the Pnei Moshe. We have that luxury. According to the Pnei Moshe, you can already put your finger on the second to last narrow line in the Pnei Moshe, right? Says the Pnei Moshe, Loi we're not talking about workers that were hired to transport them to the rooftop. Why not? Because we just finished learning in the last chapter that workers that are working with detached items prior to their Gemar Malacha, b'diyuk in that window, workers are entitled biblically to eat from it. And the way we learn Pshat in the whole sugya, not the way that Asher Ilya learned, but the way everyone else learns, is that those workers are not viewed as a purchaser. It's not a mekach. They are allowed to eat. We just learned that. So what's going to, it appears now that everything will be contradicted, as you'll see in a moment. To prevent that, the Pnei Moshe says, the first line under the Gemara, the imkain, if the workers here would be speaking about workers that are working with detached produce, and the kaimel on the as we just learned above. And all of this, the Pnei Moshe is reminding us that a poil will have the right to snack from it. He doesn't have any obligation to tithe it. It's not called mekach. There is no kivius. That's what the Torah says. Ve'ochalta anavim kinafshe chasavech. Elo dehachika amar hapayalim she'imay besada. We're speaking about payalim that are working with you in the field before the item is detached. He's giving an example. You hired workers to work in charisha or in ketzira with something else, not with this item. In other words, even if my workers, Aviv, they are detaching figs, but can they eat grapes? No. The Mishnah is going to be speaking about a scenario where the only right for the workers to eat is not because God gave them that right, but because the worker negotiated his own negotiation with the owner. That's what the Mishnah says. Now you can keep compensate. That's called mekach. So that's the case. Hapayalim she'imay. Bisman she'ein lahem olav mezonos. When they have no claim on him, that means the workers did not make up any deal with the owner. And 1 second. And so how do they have anything? The owner gave them a gift. And again, we will learn that matana eina kemecher. So a matana is not going to be koiveya. So then they are allowed to eat. Avalim yesh lohem olav mezonos. That's the way the Pnei Moshe is saying. If they negotiated their own negotiation, giving them a entitlement, not biblical, but their own exchange for their work, that's called a mekach. Harei elu lo yochlu. Now hold on. We got a problem here. What's the problem? That we just learned in the previous chapter, we're going back to figs, and to make the Mishnah flow, we are also speaking about the same figs that the Reish of the Mishnah spoke about, which are figs that are going to be laid out to dry. So I have a simple question. Okay, if they made their own deal, what is that called? A mekach. Is mekach koiveya b'davar shelo nigmar malachtai? Machloikis Rameir and Rabbi Yehuda. We paskin, it's people who should know already. Halachic Rabbi Yehuda. So mekach should not be koiveya. So even though they're getting it as a mekach, so what? Don't forget, the Mishnah is speaking about the hapoy halam. It's a vav hamachaber. So look inside the Pnei Moshe. The first white line, harei elu lo yochlu. So he says that can't be lav mitam the kemekach. It can't be because of mekach. Why? The whole lesa, that's wrong. Shaharei eina mekach kevei b'davar shelo nigmar malachtoi. Kid Rabbi Yehuda the halachic kavase. It's gavaldik that we're learning a Mishnah. Every step appears to be contradicting what we learned above. Elo hachi tama achrina ika. Now the Pnei Moshe says the third chapter is introducing something that we never learned yet, and that is mishum dahachoiv al habalabayis litan lehem zoynois, because that is the deal that they made. He got hired to thresh wheat, bitnai that he gets to eat figs. And the owner did not tithe it at all because he didn't have to. Now there's a problem on the owner, not on the worker, which is and v'kaimelon the ein poirin choiv min hatevel. And he's saying when a person owes compensation to a worker, that is a bona fide choiv. Mishum dahava kemechira v'asur limkor min hatevel. You're selling him tevel. Amazing. So, by the way, I know we're learning Daf Hayomi style. The Pnei Moshe was very innovative in how he resolved everyone else's questions here. So first of all, the worker is not working with figs. B'chlal not. He has no right to eat the figs. It's only because he made a deal. So if he didn't make a deal to eat the figs and the owner wants to give him some of these figs, b'chlal, it's not a problem because matan is not kiveya. If they made a deal, and based on what we learned up until now in Pedic Beis, you would say, well, it's taka mekach. But Rabbi Yehuda holds it's a mekach, but davar shaloi nigmar malachlei. Why is it a davar shaloi nigmar malachlei? Because the owner plans to put it out on the roof to dry. And I want to say just for the record, you can't argue, Aviv, but these figs are not going to be left to dry. That's a kash on this whole sugya. We don't say it. We say since the batch of the figs are being designated to be left out to dry, the definition of each fig is that they are all davar shaloi nigmar malachtoi. And even if a few minority of them are going to be removed to be eaten as a snack, it's still going to be viewed as something shaloi nigmar malachtoi. So what's the issue? So it's not more, I know the doiche goes on the words. It's not that they can't eat it. Really, the Pnei Moshe is saying, the owner is not allowed to give it to them. But he made a deal with them of it that he's going to give it to them. So what should the owner do? The owner has to tithe it, and then he can give it to them. In other words, it's a din on the owner. It's a din on the moicher. That you cannot be the ein poiden choiv min hatevel. Beautiful, chiddush, novelty.
And what's the status of the worker if he gets to eat? If he does eat them, because they're still table.
If the worker takes it and eats it, the worker did nothing wrong according to the Pnei Moshe, because there was no kiviyus. In other words, the words hareza lo yochlu doesn't fit. Okay, say that.
That's your question. This worker guy that has no arrangement.
The one that had who could eat.
That we're saying he could eat.
Yeah.
How's he any different than me? I'm not a worker. I'm in the guy's chutzah. Can I go eat?
Sure. If the guy gives you a gift, no. Sure.
No, we're giving categories. Wife and kids, okay? Family, it's unprocessed for them.
Then he's saying, I want to add that the wife and kids doesn't only mean wife and kids. That if someone happens to be in your yard, the first din of the Mishnah is, just like we had in the last chapter, is Truma going to be Nikva, and throughout, we learned a question by Truma, we learned a question by Mekach. Now we're learning in this Pedic the same thing by Chotzer. We are going, same, Chotzer won't be Koveya B'davar Shaloi Nigmar Malachta. Period. The only exception will be for the owner Marasayin. Only the owner, you'll see. The next case in the Mishnah is that if a worker who's working with something else gets it, Hareza lo yoichlu, says the Pnei Moshe, that really means you're not allowed to pay him. Ein poin chayv ben hatevel. I love it. Next.
I'm not able to hear. Why can the owner not give? Why can the owner not give it?
Because the owner made a deal with the worker that in the compensation, part of the compensation for him working with his grain is he's going to get a couple of figs. Yeah. Since the owner did not tithe it, he doesn't have to, but he didn't. You can't pay your debt min hatevel.
Oh, so that's like a general that you can't pay with heaven.
The question will be on the previous chapter when we spoke all about cases. If a guy made up that give to me and give to my son, remember that? So the Mishnah says he can eat, his son cannot eat. The Pnei Moshe will learn that over there, the son cannot eat because Mekach is koiveya, and in addition, now the owner was not allowed to give it to him anyways because ein poin chayv min hatevel. We just learned the new din. We have to add it to the previous chapter. Next case, weiter. Hamoitzi poyalav lasada. If you're taking your workers out to the field, and it has to be, again, workers, a type of work that does not entitle them to eat. It must be. Give you an example. They were hired to hoe under the tree of the Zayis, and we learned. That's it. Bisman she'ein lohem olav mezoinus, same thing. They happen to be there. The owner takes a couple of olives and gives it to them, oichlen upeturim, because a gift is not koiveya. Aval yesh lohen olav mezoinus. If they made their own personal claim, now we view it as what? As a mekach. Guys, we're not talking about the davar shaloi nigman malachta. This is a davar shel nigman malachta. So mekach is going to be koiveya, right? Now, can the employer give them this product according to the Pnei Moshe? He shouldn't have. He's paying chayv min hatevel. But if he gave it to them, so here the Mishnah is reviewing the din that even though mekach is koiveya, b'med dvarim amurim, if you have tzeiruf, if there is a combination of two or more, but if it's only one, then even mekach is not koiveya. Oichlen achas min hate'ena, one at a time. And let's remind ourselves, this is not only true Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara established this is true even Rabbi Meir, because here if the worker is taking achas. If the employer is giving, then according to Rav Meir, achas wouldn't help anymore. Then this would only be Rabbi Yehuda. Now, combining will also include if these olives were already together in a basket or in a box. They were already combined together. Even when the employer is giving the worker one at a time, the worker is not allowed to eat it because there was tzeiruf in the sal. So now the Mishnah is giving you a detail in the tzeiruf. Tzeiruf doesn't only mean that it shouldn't be together in the hand. It means it should never be together. Avol loy min asal, if the olive, if the te'ena, whatever he's eating, the te'ena is the case of the Mishnah, the fig. You're eating the fresh figs. If they were gathered first in a basket, v'loy min hakupa, or they were gathered in a box, or they were put in a pile. Muktzah here does not mean to dry out. They were piled together. If these items were already combined, then the heter of mekach is koveya, but there's no tzeiruf, is irrelevant. There was tzeiruf. It's another detail, behemshach to the last chapter. Another din. Again, hoeing under the olive trees in a scenario where there is no biblical entitlement. So, if the worker negotiated his own entitlement, mekach is koiveya, again, only if there's tzeiruf. So oichal achas upater, and only the im tzeiraf, then he's going to be chayiv. Another example, and this next example is negeya. How do you view tzeiruf by onions? Lenakesh b'psalim. Someone was hired to weed a onion field, an onion patch, and as we mentioned in the last chapter, weeding does not give you a biblical entitlement because you were hired not to harvest the item. You were hired only to take out the weeds. So you're not allowed to eat midorais. But if the worker made his own deal, Amar lo yalmanas lo yachal yarak, so now we view that as mekach. Mekach is koiveya. And we just said that even when mekach is koiveya, if it's achas potter, how do you define the achas by the onions? So we're speaking here about the leaves, that we view each leaf as a separate entity. We're talking about the leaves of the onions. So if the worker is going to eat, he has to pluck out only one leaf at a time. Mekartem ole, and then he's allowed to eat it. But if the imtzeiraf, if he combines two leaves or more, then he's going to be chayiv because it's mekach together with a tzeiruf, with a combination. Okay, atkan the Mishnah, and let's unpackage it. So let's remind ourselves, let's go back to the first case of the Mishnah. The fact that the Mishnah said that hamavir te'enim, that banavu b'nei beisoy are allowed to eat marafulda, Because since the kavana is to lay it out to dry, we view the vigs as a davar shaloi nigman malachtoi, and the iyas penei hachotzer is not kiveya but davar shaloi nigman malachtoi. Why did the Mishnah have to say banavu b'nei beisai? Is a charaya l'choira? Oh, the Gemara is asking, what about he himself? Who atzmai ma'u sheyoichal? And the emes is a machlekes hamiroyim. I know that the Marafulda only quoted the Rav. So Rav is the one that says you're right. It's dafke banavu b'nei beisai because who asur loichal. Because the owner himself is not allowed to eat. We'll see soon why. But Ula Rabbi Yishmael, in the name of Rabbi Lazar, no. Who mutar lachal? He is also allowed to eat. Now let's understand what is their argument. So the Gemara initially attempts to explain it. Rav, right? The Marafulda quoted the Rav. The Rav who says that the owner himself is not allowed to eat. Why does he say that? Because he follows Rabbi Meir. What did we learn in the previous chapter, my friends? Rabbi Meir is the one that holds that even b'davar shaloi nigmar malachtoi, mekach will be koiveya. The Gemara is combining mekach with riyas b'nei achatzer. Why would that be? Especially according to, I think it was Rabbi Yechanan in the previous chapter, we had a machlekes Rabbi Yechanan and Ish Lakish, whether the riyas b'nei chatzer is biblical, like riyas b'nei abayis. We had a machlekes Bavli in Yerushalmi. What does Rabbi Yechanan say? Or whether it's midrabanan. We're going to go that Re'iyas B'nei Chatzar is only a rabbinic event that's going to be koiveya. And therefore, we can be makish, we can compare, we can learn one from the other. Just like by Mekach, Rab Meir holds that Mekach b'davar shaloi nigman malachtoi will not be koiveya. Same thing will be with Re'iyas B'nei Chatzar. In other words, the initial attempt is, why does Rab say that he's not allowed to eat? I'll tell you why. Re'iyas B'nei Chatzar. You know what the problem with that is, Aviv? According to Rab Meir, if Re'iyas B'nei Chatzar is koiveya, even b'davar shaloi nigman malachtoi, then why banavu b'nei beisai? Why can they eat? That's going to be the problem. Okay, and Rabbi Lazar was speaking about it because it was Ula Rabbi Yishmael b'shem Rabbi Lazar. The Amoyre Rabbi Lazar who says that who mutar lechol, he follows the Rabbanan who argue with Rav Meir by Mekach, and therefore again we are comparing. They argue here as well. The Rabbanan are the ones that hold that b'davar shaloi nigman malachtoin re'iyas b'nei achatzer is not koiveya, so therefore he can eat. Problem is, how can you say that Rav holds like Rav Meir? Because if anyone here would hold like Rav Meir, then the whole Mishnah doesn't work. Then afilu banavu b'nei beisai yasurim. That's the problem. It's not like Rav is saying who asur loichal, but they are also asur. No. Elot must be that Rav holds like Rabbi. Which Rabbi? We'll see in a second. And Abu Lazar, which is Ula Rabbi Yishmael b'shem Rabbi Lazar, they follow the Rabbanon that argue with Rabbi. What Rabbi are we talking about? The Rabbi of Marasayan that we mentioned in our intro. To Amar Rab Simen b'shem Rabbi Shua ben Levi. That Rabbi Yosi ben Shol said in the name of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Ein oichlen al hamukza ela al mekoymoi. Following not Rabbi Meir. We don't paskin like Rabbi Meir. Following the shita that bedavar shaloi nigman malachtoi re'iyas b'nei hachatzer will not be koiveya. On top of that, says Rabbi, the Chachamim were afraid. What were they afraid? When an item is not ready, you can see it's not ready. Figs don't look like they're loy nigman malachton. What made it an item that's not ready? The kavana of the owner to let them out to dry. But the observer who doesn't know you had that kavana. So you need to have something that makes it more obvious that the intention is to dry it out, therefore rendering it. So what do you need? Al mekoyme. Al mekoyme means on the roof. When the dry figs, when the plump figs are on the roof, people see, people understand it's there because you plan to dry them out. Now, this is Rebbe, but Divrei Chachamim, what is the sheet of the Chachamim? When we said that Rabbi Lazar Kerabanan, the Chachamim are like we heard from Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi b'shem Rabbi Shua ben Levi, that the din that oichlen al hamuksa, which means you are allowed to eat when you plan to dry it out. Planning to dry it out renders it adavar shaloi nigman malachtei. And b'davar shaloi nigman malachtei, we don't paskin like Rabbi Meir. We hold that, like in the last chapter, Mekach will not be koiveya. In our chapter, Pnei HaChatzer, Riyas Pnei HaChatzer will not be koiveya. That leniency is bein al mekoymai, bein shaloi al mekoymai. So that's the Gemara asks right away. Shkoyach. So we're going to have to resolve that. Before we ask that question, Danny, which is the next obvious question, the Gemara finds something else that has to, we have to bring up something else first, which is, Moisev Rabbi Yossi ben Shol. Le Rebbe, which is amazing. You see, Rabbi Yossi ben Shol was the one that quoted Rebbe. So he's quoting Rebbe, but when Rebbe, that's why we're going first, because before we bring Rebbe Shita to our Mishnah, right away the kasha is, what's one of them in Beisoi? Just to know that when Rabbi Yossi ben Shol heard this din of Rebbe that ein oichlin ala muksa el al mekoymei, he asked him from a Mishnah that we have in this Masechtas Meiser. We're going to have it on Daf Chavav. And the Mishnah says that when it comes to caribs, hacharuvim, ad shalei kinsan l'roish hagag, as long as they were not gathered on top of the roof, whenever something is let out to dry, when is it dried? What is the Gemara Malacha? When they are gathered after they were let out to dry. So a Mishnah says when it comes to caribs that until when they are gathered after they were dried, they are allowed. They're allowed to be fed to the animals, just to make it clear that feeding something to animals is equal halachically like me snacking. Maya chilas arai and feeding something to the animals go hand in hand.
But these chutzers are open to the public. The public can see
not
them.
open to the public. I'm talking about me. I own charuvim. I decided to put out my charuvim to dry. And the Mishnah says that until the gemar malacha of the charuvim makes sense. There was no kavius. If there's no kavius, you can give it to your animal to eat. What's the problem? The Mishnah does not differentiate. The Mishnah doesn't say you can only give it to the animal to eat on the roof. No one takes their animal to the roofs. You clearly see from our Mishnah that we don't make such a difference whether it's alma koimoi or shaloi alma koimoi. So that is how we challenge the Rebbe. So that's why we're asking this question first. It's against the whole thing of Rebbe. So Amalei, so Rebbe says, Loik tisiveni charuvim, don't refute me from the Mishnah of charuvim. I'll tell you why. Something interesting. Fresh charuvim are by default animal food. When does charuvim become human food? Only when they are dried. Not like figs that are human food when they're fresh. It's only your kavana that rendered it a davar shaloi nigman amalachtoi. By charuvim, all charuvim are viewed as a davar shaloi nigman amalachtoi, because when it comes to trumas u'maisris, something that is only going to be consumed by animals, my friends, doesn't need to be tithed at all. In other words, charuvim, there's no marasayin. Everyone knows that charuvim, prior to them being fully dried out, are a davar shaloi nigman amalachta.
So it's not darko shel to pick a charuv off the tree and eat?
That's what the
They're
Gemara is
dry
saying.
on the
Fresh,
tree.
undried caribs are not fit for people. I can say one thing, that the odor to me, always as a child, of the charuvim were very bad. And maybe only after they dry do they lose that horrible odor. People don't eat them. For me, it was only the charedim. We ate them. Unlike Bo'omer. I don't know when we ate the charuvim. No, I think unlike Bo'omer, because Rabbi Yechai Bar Yochai, that's what he lived off.
Yeah,
And Tu B'Shvat. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so Bekitzer, this is beautiful. Okay, so that was Rebbe. The problem is, okay, Zozain, I got it. The answer there, Rabbi. Our Mishnah is not Meir. We got that. Problem is, again, why are you differentiating? If our Mishnah follows Rebbe, okay, I get the concept of Marasayan, so no one should be allowed to eat it. So al date de Rav, ma bein hu, ma bein banov. That's the problem. Rav is the Rav that says that hu atzmoi osur loichal. Answers the Gemara. This is such a good answer. Hu al yideshu toli b'muksa osur. Who is the one, Aviv, who determines whether it's nigman malachta or not? Who determines it? Only the owner. The owner is the one that has the right to decide. He's the owner. I'm going to have it fresh. I'm going to have it dried. And I'll tell you another detail. What were to happen if after the owner decided to put them out to dry, if the owner changes his mind? The owner says, you know what? I'm not going to put them out to dry. The owner has that right. You know, it's since the owner has bikoichoi to render it just with his machshava into a davar shenigman amalachtoi, by changing his mind, the owner is allowed to reconsider. So we want to see that he's not reconsidering. Where do we see that? When he's on the roof. He's only on the roof to lay it out to dry. There has to be something that reveals that he is not reconsidering. Now, if the owner decides to lay it out to dry, can the Banav or B'nai Beisai change its designation?
Depends
In
on their
America,
age.
the Bnei Bayis for sure could. In the Mishnah, she couldn't. Only the owner had that right.
Wait, if the kids are over 13 or 12, can they?
No, they cannot because they don't own it. It's not about their age. If I own something, I'm the only one who has the right to determine whether it's going to be liktsois or whether it's going to be to eat it for a raw. So it makes sense. So you have the power with your change of mind to make it into a davar shenigman amalachtoi. If you would have that in mind, then there's riyas pnei hachatzer. So we want to make it clear that you're not changing your mind. But banav alidei she'enam tuluyim b'muksa mutarim. In other, the classification does not depend on the children's intent. This is great. Now there's a new problem. The new problem is, I get it. By the way, this power of designating it or reconsidering is only on the owner, only on the husband. Okay. But the problem is that a man is obligated to give his wife mezainis. So the issue is, why would we not view her receiving these mezainis as an exchange, let's say, for her marriage? That's the issue. Nicha banav. You explained the difference between him and banav. And by the way, Danny, the banav would also go to payalim. When you ask if the workers came into the chutzner, the same thing. Look inside the marav folder, 3 lines from the bottom. Nicha banav. Aval b'nei beisa kashalon. B'nei beisa only means ishtoi. What's the question? Hare yesh law. All of mezainos, since a man is obligated to feed his wife. Maishna mi payalim da asurim. Kisheyesh lahem mezainos. According to the Manafulda, the Havalei Kemekach. According to the Pnei Moshe, the way we learn Gemara, a man has a choiv to feed his wife, and ein poidim in a choiv in a tevel. No, it's the same Mishnah that says on the next line that workers, same problem will be with Ishtoi. That's the problem. Gavaldik. And the Gemara is going to give 2 answers, and let's learn both answers, and we'll stop over there. Daf Chav Beis. Answer number 1 is, our Mishnah must follow the opinion. Command the Amar ein bezoinis leisha devar Torah. Look inside the top name Moshe. Command the Amar ein bezoinis leisha al bailo devar Torah. It's only a rabbinic law, and therefore, it's not a biblical chayiv. Hekilu lechoil imoy aray bedavar shaloi nigman malachton. Don't forget, it is a davar shaloi nigman malachton. Only problem is that according to the Pnei Moshe, ain't pointing chayv min hatevel. But this will mean that our Mishnah is taking a side in the machlekes. How do you interpret the words she'ed ksus and aina? One interprets all of these 3 words to be referring to intimacy, just to remember. And the other one, which is how we learn chitas, she'ed ksus and aina is mezainis, clothing, and intimacy. But mezainis is doiraisa. We don't want for our Mishnah only to follow those who hold that mezainis is the Rabbanan. So here we're going to end today's daf with a very novel way of understanding things. And the issue is, according to the Pnei Moshe, that since he's chayiv to give her something midoiraisa, how can he give her b'davar shaloi nigman? How can he give her b'davar that was not tithed? The owner didn't have to tithe it. It's because it's loy nigman amalachtei. Loy nigman amalachtei because he's putting it out to dry. I got that. And Re'iyas Pnei HaChatzer will not be koivei. We got that. But still, he's not allowed to give her. So the Gemara says this will be like we learned in the Braisa. Now, this statement will be questioned tomorrow. But I want to read this. We have another minute, Danny. Now, this is a Gavaldik Braisa. Ein based in poiskin mezoinis leishna midmei shvis. If a man, they call him what's called a deadbeat husband over here, he is not giving his wife mezoinis, or he went on a trip, she doesn't have what to eat. Whichever the case, a woman goes to Beis Din saying, "My Beis Din, I need mezoinis from my marriage." Now, I want to say the following. That Shvius, one of the laws of Peiros of Shvius, is that a person is not allowed to pay his debts from Peiros Shvius. And if Peiros Shvius was sold, kahalacha or not, remember that? We learned Masechta Shvius. All of the restrictions that God put on the product that grows on Shvius is transferred to the money. Remember, it remains in the product and it remains in the last exchange. That was the unique chumrah of Shvius. So the rule is that even if the husband has in his account money that he got in exchange of selling shvi'is produce, ain't based in poiskin bezoinis l'isha medvei shvi'is. Why? Because you cannot be perei achoiv from perei shvi'is, which in extension from money that you got from perei shvi'is. Nevertheless, says the Braisa something beautiful, that if this woman is not needing to go to court to get money from her husband, if the husband is just doing what most husbands do, they support their wives. Avol nizoinis he eitzel baila shvi'is. The husband is allowed to give mezoinis to his wife using peiroi shvi'is or using the may peiroi shvi'is. Why? Why is that? Because whenever a person is receiving from her husband without the need of involving Bezdin, even though objectively we know he's fulfilling his duty, we don't view it that way. We put this in the category of a gift. We don't view it as he's being poirei achoiv. As a husband, we can identify. You feel like you're being poirei achoiv? You're not being poirei achoiv, you're living. It's the normal flow of things. Beautiful concept. So even if a man supporting his wife is, even if Mezainis is doiraisa, if it's a normal couple, she's not going to Beis Din to say, my husband is not giving me Mezainis. We don't view it as he's being poirei achoiv. It's important for a man not to feel like he's being poirei achoiv. It's not his duty. It's his love. It's his desire. He's living, malept. It's a psychological answer. And therefore, there's no problem with a Pnei Moshe, with Ein Pardon Chayv Menat Tevel. I think it's beautiful.
Question. On this whole sugi that we've done,
yeah.
Is the owner himself, are we saying he's not allowed to eat at all? I mean, according to Rabbi and Rabbi, is he allowed to eat only on the roof?
He's allowed to eat on the roof.
He is.
He is.
So our question here, if I'm understanding, at least according to Rabbi and Rabbi, is why could the wife eat in the chutzner?
That's right.
If she's like the husband, she should also be.
No, not because she's like the husband, because she can change the designation. But we're going with the Pnei Moshe. She should be like the worker. That what?
No.
That the way the Pnei Moshe, she should be like the worker, which is that even though there is no kvius, but the employer is not allowed to give his worker.
To me, when I think this whole thing, we know there's a concept ishta kigufan.
Yes.
Right? So to me, and also we also know there's a concept that if you give something to a guy's wife, it belongs to him.
Okay.
She doesn't have her own.
That's why she doesn't get to change the designation.
Correct. So I'm saying she can't change the designation. She is like him. To me, the question is she should be forced to eat on the roof, and that's it. She can't change the designation. She's like a poil that doesn't have a payment.
You're confusing two things with the other. A poil cannot be given this anywhere.
A poil that doesn't have a deal is allowed.
A poil that does have a deal.
Right.
Why? Because since I made a deal with my employee, that means I have a choiv. I cannot be perei choiv. So that's what we're learning now. Forget about changing. It's not about changing. Is that he has a choiv to his wife, and you can't be perei choiv menat tevel. So the Gemara says when a man is supporting his wife, he's not being perei choiv.
Okay, that's it.
And now we're saying she can eat it down there because she cannot change the designation. Only the man who can change the designation is limited to the roof. More responsibility, more entitlement comes with more responsibility. She has less power. She has more. The more power, the more limited you are.
It's not perei.
That's what it is.
That takes care of her being this. Then the only question is why is she different than the owner and not restricted to the roof?
The Gemara already answered that because she cannot change the designation. Only the one who can change the designation has to go to the roof.